September 7th, 1936, Hobart, Tasmania. It was the coldest week of the year. The final and worst cold fronts were blowing through, battering Hobart with freezing gales of wind. On nights like these, the employees of the Mars Zoo would typically put the animals up to keep them out of the cold. But one animal would be neglected of this privilege that night. One animal too precious to lose, forever changing history in its wake. Because on that Monday night, the last Tasmanian tiger would be left out in the cold, passing away by next morning. And unbeknownst to the world, the Tasmanian tiger, from then on, be lost forever.
Or is it? Is the Tasmanian tiger really lost to history? Did it really go extinct in 1936? Or did it continue to live on, even into the present? Is the Tasmanian tiger still alive today? In today's video, we're going to be talking about everything from what the Tasmanian tiger is, to its biology, its history, its supposed demise, continued sightings, future revival, and so much more. So stay tuned to learn everything there is to know about the Tasmanian tiger. But before we get too far into the video, if you want to support me and my channel, then I would much appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, maybe even leave a comment. But the most impactful thing you can do is to watch my full videos. And I know they're long, so it even takes you 2 or 3 goes. And that shows YouTube that this is quality content that they should push on to new people. With that out of the way, let's get back to the video. The thylacine, which is also known as the Tasmanian tiger or the Tasmanian wolf, or by the scientific name Thylacinus cynocephalus, which means dog-headed pouched dog, was a carnivorous marsupial that at one point spanned from mainland Australia north to New Guinea and south to the island of Tasmania. But before I get into the history of the thylacine, let me tell you what it is so that you know what I'm talking about moving forward in the video. Like I said, the thylacine was a carnivorous marsupial that was about the size of a golden retriever. The fur is described as being short, dense, and soft, being a sandy yellowish to beige to sometimes even having a gray color to its fur, along with about 20 distinct stripes that ran down its back. It had relatively short legs compared to other animals and a long, stiff tail jutting out the back. Thylacines also bred during the winter and spring, so take that as you will. Being a marsupial, they did have a pouch. It was a back opening ones that females used to keep their young protected until they were old enough to be out on their own, similar to a kangaroo with their joey. The thylacine also had an insane bite radius, being able to open their mouths to almost 90 degrees, which is crazy. I mean, look at that. Ain't that just funky? Now, after all this, you might be thinking to yourself, man, that thing don't really look like a marsupial. I mean, to me, that looks more like a dog, kind of like a small wolf almost. And you'd be correct. It is very wolf-like, and for a very specific reason. That reason is something called convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is a process whereby distantly related or even completely unrelated species will adapt to fulfill the same ecological niche. Does that make sense? Alright, here's an example. Let's take 3 classes of animals: fish, reptiles, and mammals. 450 million years ago, the shark became an apex predator, developing a streamlined body along with large and sturdy dorsal and pectoral fins, for better and quicker movements in the water. Fast forward to 250 million years ago, and the ichthyosaurs come from the reptiles. Fast forward to 250 million years ago, and the ichthyosaurs come from the reptiles. The ichthyosaur is a predator with a streamlined body as well as large dorsal and pectoral fins. And finally, 50 million years ago, the dolphin, a predator with a streamlined body and large dorsal and pectoral fins. These are 3 completely unrelated species, millions of years apart, and yet they're so similar. This is convergent evolution. And in the same way, the thylacine and the wolf are very good and one of the actually best examples of convergent evolution themselves, both evolving to fulfill the same ecological niche, that niche being an apex predator keeping prey populations in check. And chances are you never thought about the old Tassie tiger as an apex predator, but they most certainly were. In fact, they were the only marsupial apex predator to have ever lived, and without them, the Tasmanian ecosystem has kind of been in shambles without their apex predator. With prey animals like wombats and kangaroos overpopulating the area, not having a predator is allowing a lot of sick and diseased animals to live and breed, which is genetically hurting the prey populations. Having a predator to pick off the weak is actually really important for the health of a species. Okay, so now you know what the ecosystem is like without the thylacine. But what was it like when the thylacines were still alive? Thylacinus cynocephalus is one of over 10 species of thylacines known to exist. And those thylacines range in sizes from that of a small quoll to ones that are even larger than the now extinct Tasmanian tiger. But where do they all go? Like I said before, the thylacine used to span across a much larger area, everywhere from the island of New Guinea to mainland Australia and south to the island of Tasmania. Well, the first thylacine pops up in the fossil record over 20 million years ago. with the species Thalassinus macnesi. It lived in the Queensland area of Australia, right about here. Other notable species are ones like Thalassinus megariani, which was the largest and heaviest species of thalassin known to exist, weighing in at over 165 pounds, way larger than the Tasmanian tiger, which weighed only 65 pounds. There's also Thalassinus potens, which was the last species of thalassin before the cynocephalus moved down to Tasmania.
Okay, one cool little fact what I want to share with you all is thylacine cave paintings, because yes, that's a thing, and it is just as cool as you think it is. These are rock and cave paintings located in places such as the Kimberley region in Western Australia and the Deaf Adder Creek area in the Northern Territory. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but I find it really cool to see cave paintings of now extinct animals, because I think some people fail to grasp, first, how long humans have, been a thing, and also really understand that extinct animals really used to be alive. I know that last point may sound a little redundant. I mean, obviously people know that they used to be alive, but I don't think they fully realize. Like, any extinct animal, whether it be the thylacine or the passenger pigeon or the dodo, they used to be just as real and prevalent as any animal we have today. Sometimes I think about how some people have seen these animals too. There are people who've seen an actual dodo bird, but that doesn't really compute because since these animals aren't real today, when you see a dodo bird, it doesn't look real. It looks kind of fake because it's not real. At least not anymore. But there are people who have seen a living dodo with their own eyes. People who have touched a living dodo with their own hands. Now that dodo is dead, so no new people can experience that, and the people who did are dead, and with them went the realness of the dodo. Whatever, I'm done sidetracking. Let's get back to what I was talking about. Thalassinus cynocephalus, the Tasmanian tiger we all know and love, emerged in Australia around 4 million years ago. And it was all good. I mean, they were the top predators. They had nothing to worry about. Until about 4,000 years ago. What happened 4,000 years ago? Well, the dingo arrived in Australia.
But wait, the dingo isn't native to Australia, I hear you asking? Well, don't worry. An explanation I have for you, my young pupil. Now, it is believed that the dingo originally comes from China, where it then went to Taiwan and spread through the rest of Southeast Asia. But how did it get to Australia? Well, it was hunter-gatherers from the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia that brought it down to Australia, where the dingo then spread across the rest of the mainland. But dingoes aren't even the main reason the thylacine went extinct in Australia. By far, that reason why is people. Unsurprisingly, we humans have a tendency of doing this. But it wasn't even the Europeans. It was the native Australian people who were known to hunt and eat the thylacine. Now add on extra hunting pressure from the dingo, and bye-bye thylacine in Australia. This left the thylacine only in Tasmania by 4,000 years ago.
And at this point, the thylacine was kind of already on the decline, as only 5,000 individuals were thought to have been left in Tasmania. Then the year 1803 rolled around. The first European settlements by the British happened in Risdon Cove, and with the Europeans came the farming industry. With huge plots of land being cleared to make rooms for livestock such as sheep and cattle, the thylacine was being pushed back from their homes. Now, obviously this isn't good for the thylacine, and things would only get worse, because there was a problem in Australia, and the people needed a solution. Farmers' livestock were being killed left and right, and despite evidence that the real problem was feral dogs and mistreatment from the farmers themselves, the thylacine was a scapegoat. It got blamed for all the problems and became hated and feared by the population. As early as 1830, the first bounties were set up by farmers, and in 1888, the Tasmanian government set up a bounty of £1 per adult and 10 shillings per juvenile. The bounty system lasted until 1909, claiming the lives of over 2,100 thylacines. It is thought that over 3,500 thylacines were hunted between 1830 and the 1920s. Mix this with the spread of feral dogs, foreign diseases like mange, widespread habitat loss, and I have low hopes that the thylacine survived. Take 5,000 thylacines, take off 3,500 from human hunting alone, throw in dogs, mange, habitat loss, and I think we're looking at less than 1,000 thylacines by the 1930s. The last known shooting of a thylacine in the wild is shown in this picture, shot by Wilfred Batty of Maubana in May of 1930. After this, sightings in the wild became extremely rare. By the mid-decade, scientific and zoological communities began to worry about the state of the thylacine. Unfortunately, their worries were too late. The thylacine would be granted protected status in July of 1936. Only 59 days later, the last known specimen would die in Hobart's Bimara Zoo on September 7th.
Which, sidetrack, You may have seen the last thylacine being a male named Benjamin, but that's not actually true. In 2022, the thought to have been lost remains of the last thylacine were discovered in the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery. After being studied, we now know that the last thylacine was actually a female. So where did this rumor come from? It came from a man named Frank Darby, a man who claimed to have been the last curator of the Hobart Zoo. In May of 1968, one Frank Darby approached the Victorian Grand Pissy. He told a story of working at the zoo and how the last thylacine, Benjamin, would be fed live rabbits to entertain the public. The story was published in the Melbourne Press in 1968, but wouldn't spread in Tasmania until the 1980s. Suddenly, there was an explosion of the name Benjamin in reference to the last thylacine. Local reporters were tracked down Alison Reed, the daughter of the last zoo owner and who worked there herself. And she said that no one named Frank Darby ever worked in the zoo, and quote, she also took incredible offense at the idea that her and her father were feeding live animals to their carnivores as a public exhibition. Frank also showed his ignorance on anything thylacine related when he told in his story that the thylacine was mute and voiceless. This was actually a myth created by farmers in the 1920s when everyone was saying, thylacines are out there killing all the sheep, and the reason you can't find them is because they don't make a sound. Frank Darby was a BS artist. The last thylacine was a female, and was not called Benjamin.
But anyway, despite that female thylacine dying in 1936, thylacine wasn't officially marked extinct until 1986. Because of certain laws, it had to go 50 years without a sighting to be marked extinct. But also, no one knew it was gone. In 1936, no one thought the thylacine went extinct. The Mars Zoo sent people out to just go get another one when the last one died, but they never found one. There were still sightings from time to time, people claiming to see them, but never bodies, no evidence that they're truly still alive. Now, is it possible that the thylacine still lived on? That maybe it didn't go extinct in the 30s, but survived into the present day? It's a heavily debated topic. Anyone who has spent time in the cryptozoology world would know that the general community thinks that they are alive, or at least very likely to still be alive. But in terms of more scientific communities, I'll give you the example of two papers. First, one by Colin Carlson, an ecologist interested in modeling the extinction risks for species. He said that the thylacine likely went extinct between 1936 and 1943, and with the most optimistic scenario, it still did not survive past the 1960s, with a final surviving estimate being 1 in 1.6 trillion. So, not very hopeful. Then there's the 2021 paper by Barry Brooks and his colleagues. In their paper, they said the thylacine actually went extinct in the late 90s to early 2000s, and quoting Barry, while improbable, these aggregate data modeling suggests some chance of ongoing persistence in the remote wilderness of the island. Barry and his colleagues took more than 1,200 alleged sightings of the thylacine in Tasmania between the years of 1910 and 2019. With more than 100 years of sightings, they individually ranked every single sighting on a scale of likeliness from 1 to 5.
In 2018, 3 cyclists were out riding one morning when they claimed to see a thylacine walk across the street. This gets a 4 out of 5 because more than one person saw it. Also in 2019, a government plant biologist saw what they believed to be a thylacine about 100 feet away in a clearing before it bounded into the bush. This gets a 4 out of 5 because while just one person saw it, it was a biologist who saw it.
But easily the most well-known thylacine sighting to date is the 1982 Hans Narding sighting. Hans worked with the Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Department and was an experienced field ranger. On a rainy night around 2 a.m., Hans awoke, and out of habit he scanned the area around him with his flashlight. But when he did this, he saw a large thylacine standing about 20 feet away from him. He wanted to grab his camera, but it was too far out of reach, and he didn't want to startle the creature. So instead he studied it. It had about 12 stripes along its back on a sandy-colored body. The thylacine didn't move, only opened its jaws, showing its teeth. Hans reached for his camera, but in doing so he scared it off. Now, a living thylacine in 1982 would be pretty good evidence it's still alive today. Considering this was made by an experienced park ranger, a lot of people take this as good evidence that the thylacine lived on, at least beyond 1936. Brooks' paper does shine some new hope on the persistence of the thylacine. If I crushed your hope before, I probably brought a lot of it back. So is the thylacine still alive? Well, by the best evidence I could find, no, it's not. I mean, come on, if the thylacine is still alive, you'd expect something, right? Some shred of evidence, but we just don't have that. So maybe the thylacine is dead after all. Maybe our conservation efforts were indeed too late. That doesn't mean that we'll never see the thylacine again, right? Let me introduce you to Tiger Lab. Tiger Lab is a new research center focused on marsupial conservation and restoration. In other words, they're trying to bring back the thylacine. Yeah, you heard me right. Tiger Lab is trying to bring the thylacine back to life. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the specifics of how it all works because, frankly, I'm not that smart, alright? Genetics was my least favorite part about my high school biology class, and it just doesn't make sense, and I refuse to believe that people can actually make sense out of it. However, I will give you a brief rundown of what they're doing. The thylacine has one of the most complete genomes of any extinct species to date. In fact, the genome is so well studied, we now know that the thylacine, on top of everything else, suffered from low genetic diversity, even before they were being hunted, leaving it susceptible to diseases and unable to properly fight them off. If the thylacine continued to live on, it would struggle in much the same way the Tasmanian devil does, where devil facial tumor disease, the only known infectious cancer, is decimating the population. Having killed already 90% of the devils in the wild, it's left only about 20,000. Tiger Labs hopes on reviving the Tasmanian tiger and reintroducing it into the wild to start up a stable population. Now, like I said before, the Tasmanian ecosystem has been going downhill since losing their apex predator. But will bringing the Tasmanian tiger really make it better? The short answer is yes. Yes, it will actually, and here's an example. In 1926, when the gray wolf was hunted to extinction within Yellowstone National Park, a new ecological order emerged. With oversized populations of elk flooding the area, native trees and vegetations were overgrazed, mountainsides left barren, and riverbanks eroded. Yellowstone was a shell of its former self and would remain this way for the next 70 years. But then in 1995, the first gray wolves would be reintroduced into Yellowstone. With the wolves back on the prowl, the elk dispersed and their numbers decreased. The overgrazed mountainsides and the eroded rivers began to flourish with new life. Cottonwoods, aspens, and willows reclaimed the landscape. Rivers became fixed into place with the new vegetation. Beavers, amphibians, and birds would also return to this new, once again, great landscape. So yeah, bringing back the thylacine would be really good for the Tasmanian ecosystem, but it's not happening anytime soon. It's expected to be the 2030s when the first thylacine-like cell is created, and it could be decades after until the first Tasmanian tiger proxy is born. So don't hold your breath. Scientists are working on it, and hopefully this all comes to fruition within our lifetime. In conclusion, the thylacine, or Tasmanian tiger, is dead. I don't think it's still alive. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I'm like 98% certain on this, okay? Because I still have a small sliver of hope that they're still out there, that maybe we'll find one in the deep inners of Tasmania, like the Franklin Gordon area, for example. But it's just that there was only 5,000 before Europeans arrived, and then subtract 3,500 that we hunted, feral dogs, diseases, low genetic diversity. I just don't think a small population can survive that. And here's the thing. The general person who's into like cryptids and cryptozoology, they think that these things are without a doubt still alive. And they say this because, I don't know, there's a lot of forests out there. I mean, there's gotta be. I mean, I feel in my gut, there's gotta be something out there. And I'm gonna be honest, that was kind of me walking into this video. I would look at Tasmania and be like, whoa, that's a lot of forest right there. That is so much forest that some of these things could hide in there. But now I am much more of the opinion that these things are extinct. Now don't get me wrong, I want the Tassie tiger to be alive. I want us to go out there. I want us to find a population out there. But I just don't think that's a possibility anymore. But I'll leave with this.
The Tasmanian tiger is an absolutely marvelous and unique animal. Being the only marsupial apex predator, it certainly won't be forgotten. And while it is sad to say, I think it's extinct. I don't think it went extinct in 1936. I do believe it lived much longer into the 1900s, but I think they're dead. I had a lot of fun researching this topic and making this video. So if you had fun watching, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.